Listeners, beware. This podcast contains themes of the macabre and does not shy away from the details. Our content is graphic and our language is colorful. We might not be your cup of tea, so listener discretion is strongly advised. You have tuned in to The Killer Tea, a podcast hosted by two best friends with a proclivity to decipher the deeply demented minds of murderers.
Welcome to episode 4 of The Killer Tea, with your hosts Christina and Chelsea. On today's episode, we'll be talking about Dennis NILSEN, the kindly killer.
Hi, I'm Christina.
And I'm Chelsea.
And this is
The Killer Tea.
Welcome to the next fucked up hour of your life. Thanks for joining us.
Episode 4. We've made it. We've made it to 4.
We made it to 4 episodes. Look at us.
So proud of us.
There was a fist pump. You missed it, though.
We're moving across the pond this week to talk about Mr. Dennis NILSEN.
Dennis NILSEN was a Scottish... I'm going to delete that part. I don't know where I was going with it. I saw November 23rd and I was like, oh, fuck, I need to comment on my birthday. But I didn't do that. So, anyways, reverse. Our very special serial killer. Nope, that's also not the right words. We're not going to... We're not going to call him special, guys.
Okay, I would like to point out that this was Christina's choice this week. He is our... quote-unquote lesser-known serial killer.
He's lesser known to the United States and not so... He's a big deal in England.
He is a big deal in England. So Christina decided to pick this particular serial killer because she has the same birthday as him.
And I turned dirty 30 in a week and a half, so why not talk about serial killers' birthdays and, necrophilia? How did you spend your 30th birthday?
Very pregnant, eating Mexican food.
Same but different.
And Christina, do you want to kind of get us started with a little backstory on his childhood?
You want me to set the scene?
Set the scene, baby.
All right. We're in England. No, we're in Scotland. Fuck England. We're in Scotland. Nielsen's father, Olav, had been a Norwegian soldier. And when the Nazis conquered Norway during World War II, he was sent to Scotland for safety. Of all places. Interesting.
Scotland.
Nobody wants to go to the Highlands in the cold weather. I mean, it's gorgeous, but I don't blame them. That's where he met Nielsen's mom.
Elizabeth Duthie White.
Elizabeth was a local socialite. She was really popular. Everybody liked her. There was tons of information available about the kind of person that she was in her youth. Not a ton of information about how she was as a mother.
No, but I mean, we can kind of assume that because she was a socialite and was well-liked, she was probably a pretty normal person.
Yeah, that's the speculation that I'm making here.
Now, his father, on the other hand,
he
was a raging alcoholic.
And they actually, in the 3 years that they were married, they did not own a home together. They never lived together.
No, his father, even though they were married, his father would come home randomly while he was on leave from the military, and every time he came home, Elizabeth got pregnant. That's basically the way it was. She was a single mom with a baby daddy that was married but didn't really do anything.
Yeah, they popped out 3 kids in that time.
Olaf Jr., Dennis, and then their daughter Sylvia.
So Olaf Jr., Dennis, and Sylvia. Olaf was not happy with the paternal role. He was not around. Obviously, between work and just not being a great dad and an alcoholic, they got divorced.
Yep.
And, Elizabeth, she ended up moving in with her parents. Dennis didn't really know his dad. He doesn't have memories of his dad. I don't think he ever met his dad.
I think he met his dad, but he was so little that I'm sure he just has no memory of that.
Yeah, I think he was 3 years old.
He was 4 when they finally
divorced.
Split up.
Okay.
And, in that time, he'd probably only met his father a handful of times. And he was really, really close with his maternal grandfather.
Elizabeth moved herself and the kids in with her parents. The paternal male role then went to her father, and that is who Dennis looked up as his positive male influence in his life.
The relationship he had with his grandfather was the only real tactile relationship he had with an adult, meaning that Dennis was kind of quiet, closed off child, even at the age of 4. Like, he was very kind of quiet, wasn't overly cuddly.
Yeah, his mom described him as just not being an affectionate child, that she would want to give him hugs and kisses and snuggles, and he just wasn't interested. And the only one that he was interested in ended up being his grandfather.
Yeah. He would go fishing with his grandfather. They would go on walks at the ocean, looking at herring boats. He was very close with his grandfather.
So something important to know about where they're living in Scotland. It's a fisherman town.
Yes.
It's by the seaside. It's cold. It's windy. Very robust people are living in this area of Scotland because of the environment that
they live in.
They lived in. So his grandfather is a fisherman. And one time in 1951, while he was out at sea, he suffered a heart attack.
Massive heart attack, and he died.
They return his body home from being at sea, and they're Roman Catholics, so they're preparing. What was a tradition back in those days was the family actually prepared the body for the funeral. That is essentially what Elizabeth and her family was doing whenever Dennis came home from school one day. And there's a couple different versions of how this story is told.
Yeah, there's some conflicting information here. So if you listen to Dennis's side on what happened, we'll talk about that first, and then we can talk about the conflicting information that comes from that. And I think this kind of shows how Dennis perceived what was going on in his life. In Dennis's words, he came home and his mother just said to him, "Do you want to see your granddad?" And Dennis was like, "Of course I do. He's my favorite person." And she took him into the kitchen, and his grandfather was in a coffin on the kitchen table. And he recalls this as being the most traumatic experience of his life.
The other version of the story, which was told by his mother, she asked him if he wanted to see his grandfather and described him as sleeping, not this abrupt, grandpa's dead.
Right. Because it's important to note that in Dennis's version of this story, his mother did not warn him.
Which thus created this traumatic event.
Yes, that he was about to see his dead grandfather. In Dennis's version of these events, Dennis just said he assumed his grandfather was alive and well, and he had no idea he was going to be seeing this dead body.
Regardless of which version you choose to accept as truth,
this is going to be traumatic.
This is when Dennis associated death with love.
Yes.
Which is a very important theme throughout his life.
And keep in mind that at this point, Dennis is only 6 years old. So in either version of this is going to be traumatic. This is going to be a hard pill for this kid to swallow, because this is the only adult that he really does have a relationship with.
A side note about childhood psychology here is around 5 years old is when children typically learn and are able to unpack the reality of death versus life. They start to be able to understand what death is. But his personality pretty much permanently changed, and he became an even more subdued child, and he pushed away from adults and pretty much anyone who tried to show him any sort of affection.
The only other person that he was pretty close with was his little sister Sylvia.
So a few years later, NILSEN had a near-death experience when he almost drowned in the sea. Following the initial panic, he became calm and was convinced that his grandfather was going to save him.
How sad is that? Like, just as he was about to just succumb to drowning, he believed that his grandfather would come and save him. And another youth who was out in that area saw him and rescued him.
The sea is an important thing to the Scottish culture.
Yes, it is.
And particularly this town, this fisherman town, and especially to him. So we'll learn a little bit more about him as we go on, but he does write as an adult, and he writes a lot about the sea.
He does. I believe he wrote a memoir, and it was
Oh, The Drowning Boy?
The Drowning Boy.
Yeah, that's what it was.
After this, his mother remarried, and she had 4 more children. So this chick has 7 kids. Holy shit.
And they moved away from that very important town that's the sea.
Yes. And at this point, they're still Roman Catholic, and he remembers being preached at, basically, by his mother and his stepfather about the impurities of the flesh and living a...
You know, the prototypical
Catholic lifestyle, brimstone.
sin, sex,
You're going to hell.
gluttony, all of that shit. No offense to anyone who's religious. We're just 2 atheists living our best life.
Just living it up over here, y'all.
As Nielsen, I keep wanting to call him Nelson. You are not Nelson. You are Nielsen.
Call him Dennis.
Dennis. Fucking Dennis.
Dennis.
God damn it, Dennis. So as Dennis entered puberty, he began to realize that, oh no, might not be heterosexual.
Might be attracted to men.
He also wasn't 100% sure that he wasn't bisexual.
No, he wasn't really sure if he was bisexual or if he was homosexual. He really couldn't tell. And this kind of leads to a weird instance for him.
Yeah, so speaking of incest, he found that the boys that he was attracted to tended to look a lot like his sister Sylvia.
So he really wasn't sure if because he loved his sister so much, that is why he was kind of attracted to these boys, because they reminded him of his sister that he loved so much. And so to test this theory,
He fondled his sister.
he fondled his sister. And then he also...
fondled his brother.
His brother was sleeping when he decided to fondle his brother, and he woke him up. Of course he did. This led to his brother believing that Dennis was gay.
Homosexual, and he teased him.
He used to tease him relentlessly about this, and would often call Dennis a hen, which in
Brit talk is
basically calling you a girl.
Yeah.
Or a pussy or something along those lines. It's not a compliment.
It is definitely not a compliment, and it did not go over well. It created a sense of shame.
Yes.
Which, I mean, he was fondling his brother, so that's...
Ew.
Can't fault the kid for a knee-jerk reaction. Not okay to make
No.
fun of someone for potentially being gay, but
You know.
also not fun to be fondled in your sleep. Anyways, Dennis joined the Army Cadet Force, and
When he was 15.
Yeah.
He was only 15 when he joined the military.
that's a very common thing in England.
Yes, it is. Oh, we should talk about his schooling, though. It should be noted that Dennis performed very well in school.
Yeah, he was actually a bright young kid.
very smart, very interested in the arts, not so much interested in sports, though.
He performed well on his test. He didn't have problems with drugs and alcohol or truancy. He
No
was
really behavioral issues aside from being withdrawn and kind of socially awkward.
I hate to say it, but he was pretty much a normal
Kid.
that might be gay.
We talked last week about the McDonald triad, and Dennis actually showed no signs of that triad. There was no bedwetting outside of a normal age. He was not interested in fires, and he loved animals.
The only thing about his adolescence that does stick out, other than the fondling, is he was known to be an angry child.
But there could be very good reason for him being
I mean,
an
he had
angry
trauma,
child.
so like he had the
And if he was repressing homosexuality,
he
that
didn't have
can...
any positive male role figures in his life anymore.
Well, his stepfather.
It doesn't really say that. To me, what I read was that his stepfather and his mother became kind of removed at this point.
I read that initially he didn't really like his stepfather, but eventually learned to just accept him. So, I mean, he didn't necessarily have a great relationship with his stepfather, but I don't think it was necessarily a bad one either. Maybe just an indifferent one.
But overall, nothing crazy.
No, he wasn't abused. He wasn't neglected.
Some trauma. I'm not going to take away from the fact that someone he loved very much died at a very formative time in his life.
No, I completely agree. Losing someone you love at that early of a stage in your life can be very traumatic.
But nothing alarming.
No, nothing alarming, nothing that would make us go, ooh, red flag, red flag.
like so many other serial killers, he joins the military and he actually excels
very well in the military. He's in the military for 11 years, and he actually was in the military as a cook.
He continued that throughout high school, and he eventually ended up in the British Army when he finished high school, and he was deployed to West Germany and discovered that by drinking a large amount of alcohols, he was able to socialize more comfortably.
Yeah.
Which, I think that's something we can all kind of relate to, those of us with
selectively social.
So that's something that Chelsea and I will probably toss around quite a bit. That is how we
describe ourselves.
Yeah.
Selectively social.
We can be outgoing selectively.
I think it's also important to note that Dennis's colleagues in the military found him to be weird. And that's a direct quote. They found him to be weird.
He was very chatty. And he wanted to chat about the arts and classical music and plays and writing.
Which really wasn't.
When you're in the military, that's not usually what the guys in the barracks just want to.
No, they were often talking about women and, their romantic escapades. And it should be noted that in 1969, Dennis had his first sexual experience with a woman, and he said it left him feeling very depressed.
Well, the other thing that happened was he got shit-faced while he was in the Army. He passed out on the floor of a friend's apartment. And for some reason, this very normal thing that happens to, I think, every young person where you get shit-faced drunk and kind of wake up at your friend's house the next day, he developed a fantasy of, wondering what it would be like to have relations with an unconscious body.
Right. And that's kind of where things really start to get weird.
Yeah.
It kind of escalates from here. So it starts with those fantasies of just, what would it be like to have sex with an unresistant body, someone who's unconscious? And that turns into, what would it be like to have relations with a deceased body? And he actually took this even further, where he would put makeup on his body, lay in front of a mirror so he couldn't really see his face, and he would masturbate while pretending that he was a dead body.
I disapprove.
Which is horrifying. And he would also convince his colleagues to pretend to be dead, and he would take photos of them to masturbate to later.
So they come, I've heard quotes from people saying, yeah, we thought this was fucking weird, but Dennis was a weird dude, so they just did it, whatever, ha ha ha. Yeah. I don't think they obviously realized.
No, they had no idea. I mean, it was said that Dennis would not shower in the barracks with his colleagues because he was terrified that he would get an erection. And so he would shower in a stall where he could masturbate while his colleagues were naked outside of the stall.
So the Army became kind of like his sexual awakening, where he really did realize that he was attracted to men.
Yes. Which, of course, was not okay in the military.
No, especially in the 1960s. Let's be real. So Dennis was deployed to South Yemen in 1967, where violent ambushes and abductions were really commonplace, unfortunately. And several of his companions in his, battalion, whatever you want to call that, were kidnapped and murdered. And he almost very nearly had the same exact fate, because he was abducted. I don't know if you read any of that.
He was stuffed into the back of a taxi.
But he was able to fight and escape.
Right.
While not childhood trauma, that'll fuck you up.
Oh, that will 100%
That'll definitely
fuck you up.
Or in his case, create a sexual fantasy, because...
Yeah, after this, he reported as talking about one of his colleagues that had passed away. He was a young man that had been killed. And he would have this fantasy where that young man would be bathed and groomed by an older, gray-haired man and then raped as a dead person.
Foreshadowing.
I'm sorry, what?
In 1972, NILSEN retired from the Army, and he decided that he wanted to become a police officer.
As you do. I mean, that's a pretty standard, I think, switch for most people from the military is law
The military
enforcement
lifestyle, that much structure, I think,
is usually really good for people.
yeah. So going into something like being a
Police officer,
public servant, usually
falls
does
in line.
happen. It was at this time that his brother outed him to his mother as being a homosexual, and as you can imagine, that did not go.
He basically cut off all relationships with his family at that point.
Now that he's been outed and he has kind of not repressed that he is a homosexual or bisexual or whatever, he's actually going to gay bars.
Yes, he is. But it's important to know that he's still not out publicly.
Yeah, he's not out publicly, but he
Because-
frequents gay bars,
Right.
and
It's still
has
not
companions
acceptable.
there.
So being gay was still illegal in some ways. And there was a period where NILSEN was out patrolling and he stumbled upon a parked car. And there were two men having sex in this car. And this really created kind of a controversy for him because in his personal life, he is a gay man. He doesn't want to arrest these men because what they are doing is, in fact, illegal at this point. But his professional life is coming into conflict because he's a police officer. He should be arresting them.
He was a man of a bizarre sense of self because a lot of his crimes that he committed were against, once again, marginalized groups of people that were either homosexuals or sex workers.
Mm-hmm.
And in his mind, he was actually the sex worker offended his morality because for some reason the murderer, the serial killer, put himself on a higher pedestal than a sex worker.
You have to remember he was raised in a very strict Catholic household, and I think there was a lot of interpersonal conflict for him.
Well, supposedly, according to this psychologist or forensic psychologist that I was listening to, they said that this is actually a commonality between serial killers that they do, other than prostitutes being the kind of people that are easy targets for them. They also tend to offend their morality, and that anchors them. Weird.
I don't get it. So eventually his personal life is conflicting with his professional life way too much. In the mid-70s, he left the police force to be a civil servant. So basically he worked in the job sector.
Yeah, he was a security officer.
Yeah, it wasn't really anything crazy. It was just like a 9-to-5 normal job.
Something that's interesting, he showed up on time. He was a good worker. He wasn't flaky. He didn't jump from job to job to job to job.
No, I mean, he was very consistent in his work. He was a good employee. People thought he was odd, but he was liked.
They were more annoyed that he never stopped talking.
About himself.
About himself. He wasn't interested in any other relationships with people and only himself, which I guess is important because he is going to now at this point start to attempt to create some meaningful relationships with people.
Right. But
and is just unsuccessful.
He's very unsuccessful in creating these meaningful relationships with people. His friends note that he is very self-absorbed. He's a little bit of an alcoholic. He really likes to drink a lot. And he can be a very difficult person to be around because he is so very domineering and demanding with wanting things done his way. It's kind of his way or no way. And though really the longest relationship he had was with David, quote unquote, Twinkle Gallican. He met him in like 1977, 1978, and he met him at the Champion in Bayswater, which is in West London. It's a bar. And NILSEN actually witnessed Gallican being accosted by two men, and NILSEN intervened, and the two of them bonded over a couple drinks. Gallican was homeless, and so NILSEN was just like, why don't you move in?
That's the second serial killer in a row that we've had that has just randomly become a roommate with someone after briefly meeting them.
Right. And so they kind of turn into a relationship. Although if you listen to David's accounts of these, he claims that they were never in an actual relationship, that they were roommates. So there's very conflicting reports there. And I don't know if David just doesn't want to admit that he was in a relationship with a serial killer.
I think that has something to do with it because something about Dennis that's interesting. He was a photographer and
a videographer,
an amateur videographer. He loved the control of being the director of his own personal little films. And there are tons of home footage of him and his boyfriend
David. And it should be noted that they actually adopted a border collie mix named Bleep together.
Yeah, they were together.
They had to have been together. They're doing all the couple-y things.
Yeah, and even how they were with each other in the films, it was definitely more than what they're downplaying it as. But regardless, this is his first real meaningful relationship with anyone, even though it was more of a pseudo husband-wife relationship.
Right. I mean, it should be noted, like, Dennis was a total homebody. He wanted to stay home. He was more domineering and demanding, whereas David was young and he wanted to go out and was more promiscuous. And this kind of caused issues between them because, you know, David kind of got sick of the bullshit from Dennis.
Which is surprising because he didn't want to be lonely, but David actually annoyed him so much that he was willing to
let him go.
To let him go. Okay, whatever.
So David left NILSEN due to NILSEN's angry and possessive manner, per David's words. And this abandonment caused Dennis to slide into binge drinking and a 15 body count killing spree.
Stephen Holmes met Dennis at a pub on December 29th, 1978. The young teenager had tried to work without success to buy some alcohol, and, you know, Dennis slides in there and
he'd been at a rock show. He was feeling like a grown-up at a pub, and
so they drank until they passed out. Dennis woke up the next morning, looked at this kid sleeping
next to him,
and was terrified that this kid was going to leave. Like he, for some reason,
overcome with terror about being alone, just did not want this kid to leave,
that
wanted
he just
him to stay. He had to make this kid stay.
And of course, logically, what I do when I'm lonely, I just kill people.
So it's very specific how he killed Stephen. He straddled his body, put a necktie around his neck, and pulled as hard as he could. And he was actually surprised at how easily he was able to strangle this boy. And just to make sure he was extra dead, he also drowned him in a bucket of water.
Yeah. I mean, clearly you can tell that this was his first murder because that's kind of a rookie
move.
Rookie move, Dennis. That's fucked up of
but
us. I don't care.
It's not even so much that he strangled his victims. It's what he did with them after. It's important to note that Dennis does not get off on the murder of his victims.
Which is even weirder for serial killers.
Makes it worse.
So he killed Stephen and then he masturbated over his body. Not knowing what to do with the body, he placed it under his floorboards. Good old telltale heart.
As you do.
As you fucking Edgar Allan Poe.
So that takes us to the next year. In December, mind you. So there's just a thing with maybe the holidays coming up. He's feeling extra lonely. I don't know.
I don't know.
So December 3rd, 1979, he kills his next victim, Kenneth Ockenden. While they were having sex, Dennis strangles Kenneth. And Kenneth is one of the only victims that was actually reported missing. He was a student that was visiting from another country. He was actually reported missing by his family.
Dennis, 8 months after he killed Stephen, I just saw a little note here. His Norwegian is really coming out. He constructed a pyre and he incinerated Stephen's body on the... I shouldn't laugh. That's terrible. But Norwegian pyres... There's a joke there, guys.
It's a thing. Fucking Dennis. God damn it, Dennis. So what he does with the bodies after Kenneth kind of starts to escalate. When he killed Stephen, he masturbated on his body and then hid his body away.
Yeah, he panicked. Oh, shit, what do I do with it?
Right.
Yeah, but didn't want to get rid of it. Held it for 8 months, burnt it on a pyre.
As you do.
As you do.
His ritual kind of changes. So he realizes now that, you know, these bodies will hang around. And he begins this ritual where he bathes the body, grooms it, makes it comfortable, dresses it in their clothes, makes them kind of look the way he wants them to make, and then keeps the body around in his apartment. Like, puts it in an armchair and talks to it.
Poses it, take pictures of it.
And actually engages in sex with the body.
We don't know. His claims are that it wasn't penetrative.
He claims that he never penetrated the body because that would have accelerated decomposition, and that what he would do is have oral sex with the body, masturbate onto the body,
God.
or thrust between its
why
thighs.
did you say thrust?
Well, I know there's a word for it, but I don't know what it is.
No, thrust is so much worse.
Thrust.
I'm uncomfortable.
So we've hardcore ventured into necrophilia here, like big time. And he would literally keep the bodies in his apartment, come home and be like, hey babe, how was your day?
Yeah, he'd watch television with the bodies when they were like wrapped up in plastic.
He would sleep with them in his bed.
Stick them under a floorboard, save it till later, have a different conversation with each person.
What is happening here?
He would, over a 2-week period, he dug up and reburied Ockendon's body 4 times.
Oh.
And then in between each reburial, he would put the body in a chair while he drank alcohol and watched television with it.
Dennis, what are you doing, boo-boo?
So in England, they call him England's Jeffrey Dahmer. And if you don't know anything about Jeffrey Dahmer, they could be cousins.
If you don't know about Jeffrey Dahmer, have you been living under a rock?
Under a floorboard?
Oh.
Oh, no. That wasn't nice at all.
No. So that takes us to May of 1980, where we see a 16-year-old homeless boy become Dennis's next victim, and his name is Martin Duffy. And he actually accepted an invitation to NILSEN's house. NILSEN
He was a hitchhiker.
Yeah, and NILSEN offered him a bed and a hot meal and a drink, and this poor kid is only 16 and, accepts the offer. And Dennis strangles and drowns him in his sink.
Yeah, and he performs his ritual.
Yes, the bathing, grooming, and now he has a new body. Meanwhile, Ockenden is under the floorboards.
This one, he kisses this guy. He really thought he was very pretty. Ugh.
If you could only see the facial expressions that are going on right now, because it's just, this one is gross.
He eventually placed the body under floorboards when it started to bloat.
Yeah, I mean, we should note at this point, he's not taking these bodies outside and burning them individually. He now has 2 bodies under his floorboard. He can't be bothered to dispose of the bodies. He does not get enjoyment out of disposing the bodies. It's actually a nuisance for him.
His cooling off period is in the time between where I hate to say it like this, the body is fresh, and then when it really starts to enter into decomposition.
Yeah.
And once
liquefaction, I think is what they call it, which, oh God.
So once that happens, well, then it truly becomes a nuisance that he actually stresses over.
But he also doesn't want to deal with it.
No, he doesn't. I think that's when he's finally able to detach from them, is when they're no longer
attractive.
Oh God, no.
So let's just knock out the rest of these victims. Yeah, I mean, the routine doesn't change.
It really doesn't. But what does change is the neighbors are reporting the smell.
They're not enjoying the odor.
Yeah, and he gets kicked out of this home.
He kills a few more people before that happens.
How many more? I thought that was...
Oh, he killed almost all of them while living in that house. Oh. He only killed 3 in his second house.
Okay, that's mine.
So he actually killed a male prostitute who was from Scotland, Billy Sutherland. And NILSEN could not actually remember how he killed this victim, and it was later revealed that he likely strangled him with his bare hands. And then there are 6 more victims that NILSEN could not remember much about them at all.
Well, even with Sutherland, he couldn't even remember killing him. He woke up the next day and he was dead. And he was dead. I mean, according to his account.
Yeah. There was a male prostitute next who may have been from the Philippines or Thailand. Then a young laborer that NILSEN met at a bar. Couldn't remember anything about that one. The quote-unquote starving hippie that he found in a doorway in Charing Cross. And the 8th victim, NILSEN couldn't remember a single thing about him. And then murders 9 and 10 were both Scottish men picked up at pubs. And then the 11th one was a quote-unquote skinhead that NILSEN met at a pub. And this skinhead would brag about how he liked to fight and being tough. And NILSEN thought it was ironic because the skinhead had a tattoo around his neck that said, "Cut here."
It's fucked up, guys.
So fucked up.
But I mean, he was a skinhead, so.
Yeah. So that leads us to our next guy, which is in September of 81, Malcolm Barlow. And this one is super fucked up, okay? Because he's found in a doorway by NILSEN. He's having an epileptic fit or something is happening to him. And so NILSEN is like, you know what? I
can't just leave this guy.
I'm going to be a good Samaritan. I'm going to call an ambulance. And he does. NILSEN helps this dude. The next day, Malcolm is feeling much better, and he comes to
He
NILSEN
wants to thank him
for saving his life. And you know what NILSEN does? Invites him in for a drink and then fucking kills him.
because.
Why? He literally saves this guy's life and then kills him.
It was his fucked up sense of narcissism where he believed that when he realized that this kid did some unsavory things or what he deemed to be an unsavory character with being either homosexual or promiscuous sex, or I think it was promiscuous sex,
Yeah.
that he was lesser than and fucking killed him.
Yeah. Although it's interesting because Dennis says later that he never actually intended to kill anybody, that it was just kind of his panic reaction. That he would kill them because he didn't want them to leave.
So that's kind of why he's called the kindly killer. He takes care of their bodies and he's very loving and affectionate to them. He lures people in with companionship and kindness and offers of drinks, and nothing violent or scary happens in the time that they're essentially hanging out or having consensual sex.
Right.
It happens suddenly and abruptly whenever it's time for that person to go.
Yep.
He's so terrified of being alone that this is
his solution.
Which
is just so bizarre. He's got 12 bodies. Well, probably 11 because he did get rid of Steven first. He's got 11 bodies under his floorboards. He's running out of room, and his neighbors are over the smell. He's got maggots crawling up through his floorboards. It's becoming a problem. And he gets evicted. And so on the very last night that he's in this house, he gets, by his own admission, blazing drunk, starts a big old bonfire, and hauls these 11 bodies that have been rotting under these floorboards for several years at this point, and burns them. Meanwhile, there are kids coming by because there's a bonfire. Bonfire! Kids are dancing around the bonfire, trying to figure out what's going on. He's got tires burning to help mask the smell of the dead bodies. I mean, just what is happening?
who to fuck it? Like, what?
And he goes completely unnoticed. No one bats an eye at this. No one questions the bonfire. It was very common to burn your leaves at this point in this time of year.
A lot of these missing people were not reported missing because he was living in London.
Yep.
Very, very transient place.
Yep.
They're homosexuals who tend to live a life of secrecy, or they're sex workers, or they're
from other countries.
Yeah, they're from all different countries, and they're college students who do whatever the hell they want to do.
Yep.
It's in England where homosexuals were not, crimes done unto them were not the number one priority on a police officer's list. And I hate to say that, but that was the reality of the world that they lived in back then. So he gets kicked out.
He moves houses.
And he now moves into the absolutely infamous Muswell Hill flat.
And he's on the 3rd floor now.
The way the septic system works there is they are able to tell what is his waste compared to everybody else's because he's at the very top level.
Yes, exactly. So he moves into this house and he is determined he's going to start a fresh start. no more killing. He's over that. He's done. He's going to move on. He's going to live a good life. And he makes it for a couple months.
Well, because he's on this top floor of the flat, he doesn't have the ability to...
It's very inconvenient.
Yeah, so he's like, I don't even have a place to burn bodies now. I can't stick anything under floorboards. I'm a changed man.
I'm a changed man. New year, new me. New year, new Dennis.
Oh, God.
So this is where Carl Stoddard comes in. So he meets Carl Stoddard at a pub. And Carl thought Dennis was a really nice guy. He genuinely liked Dennis. Went home with him and he slept with him. Well, good old Dennis just couldn't resist his urges and attacked Carl with a tie and was strangling him. NILSEN thought Carl was dead and put Carl into the bath of water. NILSEN went to get a drink, and in this meantime, Bleep goes into the bathroom and starts licking Carl's face.
Bleep is his beloved dog that he still has from that relationship that ended.
Yes. NILSEN realizes that Carl isn't dead and has a moment of panic and actually resuscitates Carl, brings him back, performs chest compressions, gives him mouth to mouth, and then nurses him back to health over several days.
Which he actually really enjoyed doing.
Yeah, and then to top it all off, Carl couldn't exactly remember what had happened, and so NILSEN tells him that he got caught up in the sleeping bag and NILSEN was trying to help him escape, not kill him. Carl thinks this is very odd and reports it to the police, but the police do nothing.
Because again, what they equate it to is a drunk homosexual man showing up at the police station.
But you also have to remember that Dennis was a police officer.
Oh,
they
yeah, that
know
is very
Dennis. They think he's a great guy.
So he's just a nice guy.
So that takes us then into December of 81, where John Howlett comes into play. And John actually puts up a pretty big fight with NILSEN, but NILSEN was so annoyed by John because they had been pub hopping and John was actually a male prostitute and would not leave him alone, that NILSEN was so annoyed with him that he actually strangled him with his bare hands.
He tried 3 times to strangle him.
Yeah.
He had a rough, this poor dude.
It was a really, really rough one, and he actually ended up drowning him
in the damn bath. So I guess there is a theme here with the strangling and the drowning. Yeah.
The usual ritual ensues, blah, 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 blah.
But here's where shit gets changed up.
So NILSEN is like, shit, what do I do with this fucking body?
Because I can't put it under the floorboards. I don't have a back garden. That's what they call the backyards. I don't have a back garden to build a fire. What am I going to do?
So he gets this genius idea. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to chop this body up. I'm going to boil his head so his flesh melts off his face. And then I'm going to flush the pieces down the toilet.
Remember how we said that he was a cook in the army? He uses his butchering skills
to dismantle these human bodies.
I know we say this super casually, but in all of the things that I read and all in the documentaries that I watched, supposedly doing this, he did not get enjoyment.
No, this was a horrific process for him.
He had to get shit-faced drunk to start doing this, and then he would vomit from the grotesqueness.
Yeah. He did not enjoy this process at all.
He wasn't what you would, when you hear of someone being a necrophiliac, when you hear of someone being a serial killer that's a butcher, you think that they're getting enjoyment from the act of killing.
But Dennis is the opposite. He doesn't get off on the thrill of killing. He actually doesn't enjoy that process. It's
a means to an end.
It's just a means to an end. And he doesn't like the end result of having to get rid of the bodies. It's that middle period where he has this corpse that is basically just a silent partner that he can talk as much as he wants to. He can listen to music with. He can do all the things that Dennis likes to do, and they are silent. They don't have an opinion.
There is a discussion to be had about whether or not he has mental illness and whether or not he has something like narcissistic personality disorder, or maybe just strong attributes of narcissism.
Yeah.
But part of the allure of having dead bodies and having relationships with dead bodies is that nobody's going to talk back. No. He's the smartest person in the room. He's the most talented person in the room.
And that is something that Dennis wanted. And then after that, he kills a homeless man, Graham Allen. With Graham, he's not really sure what to do with his body, so he just tosses him in the bathtub for a while.
Dennis had to request a day off work to figure out what the fuck to do with... I mean, is it an impulse killing? He told forensic psychologists that he couldn't actually remember the act of killing them, that he would blank out, and when he would come to again, there was a dead body. But this is a common scapegoat for serial killers.
I don't know that I buy into this. Honestly, I just think he was so terrified of being alone that he literally just couldn't help himself.
So the last known victim was Stephen Sinclair, who he killed on January 26, 1983.
Poor Stephen was actually a heroin addict, which NILSEN was highly offended by.
This weird sense of moral superiority from a fucking serial killer to a drug addict. He felt like it was okay. And obviously he knew that it wasn't legal and he knew that it was wrong. But he felt like it was okay because he deemed these people as like garbage people.
Yeah. As he did with the other two, he eventually chops him up and flushes him down the toilet.
And he's able to rationalize this as being a murder, a sympathy killing, because as he's undressing him and going through his procedures, he notices that there's bandages covering up
suicide wounds. That Stephen had actually survived a suicide attempt, and NILSEN found it very ironic that he had killed him and just considered it a mercy killing.
This particular one I've heard a couple different ways, but he found him particularly attractive.
But he was very put off by the fact that he was a heroin addict.
He put him in bed and slept with him there. All of these treatments in his own weird way were affectionate.
He was trying to care for them.
Yeah. I hate to say it like that because it's so bizarre, but that's actually what, in his mind, he was caring for these people. I don't know. I don't know.
But Stephen is his downfall. February's rolling around, and the drains in the apartment building start getting clogged.
And there's this ungodly smell.
I wonder what could be blocking the drains.
The tenants are furious. They
all get together.
Including Dennis.
Good old Dennis. And they decide that they're going to write a letter to the building superintendent.
Strongly worded letter to the building superintendent.
And Dennis, he volunteers to write this letter. Now, there's some speculation. Was he trying to get caught? Was he trying to turn himself in? Or was he trying to deflect attention away from himself by being the one who wrote the letter?
And being overconfident. I mean,
I'm
these
not
are
really
two
sure.
very... jury's out on that.
There's conflicting opinions there because I've heard opinions on both matters.
Honestly, I see value in both of those
because
arguments.
He didn't necessarily enjoy killing people.
No. And whenever the police finally did come and he was being arrested, he
did say, "Oh, finally, help is here."
Yeah, that he always remembers that as the day that help came.
Yeah,
which
makes me think that maybe he did want to be caught.
Yeah, like maybe he was just so
tired of it.
Tired of it.
Because disposing of the bodies was not pleasant for him. It was exhausting. It was a nuisance. It wasn't something that he enjoyed.
The drains are blocked. They call a plumber.
Yep. Michael Catron of Dino Rod is actually the plumber.
Plumber shows up and he gets in the drain and he pulls out
flesh-like substance and many small bones.
That he, as just being a plumber, can tell right there it is human flesh.
Yeah, he goes, "This looks like someone's hand."
He calls his boss, and his boss very matter-of-factly is like, "Just leave it. We'll come back the next day."
NILSEN at this point knows the jig is up. And he actually goes down into the drains and tries to clean up.
Well, I think that he kind of had a change of heart. So even if we go with maybe he's tired of it or whatever, panic mode sets in. Like, oh shit, this is really happening. The police they know. Because he's there when the plumber discovers that it's human flesh. They're all standing around watching. They're all fucking standing around watching this shit. I would hate that. What a weird day. Dennis. That would have been the most Monday of Mondays ever if it was a Monday. I don't know if it was Monday.
I don't know.
So Dennis decides at like 4 a.m. he's going to go fishing for human flesh in his sewage pipes.
And the next day when the plumber does come back, he realizes that a lot of the flesh is gone. It's very suspect. Mm-hmm. And so he digs deeper into the pipes leading up to Dennis's apartment, finds more evidence. The police do note that, yes, this is human flesh. And because of the way the plumbing is set up, they know concretely that it is from Dennis's apartment.
They actually send that little thing of flesh that he pulls out, they send it off to be tested. And the person who tests it is like, yes, this is human flesh. And actually what you've pulled out here, I can tell you this person was strangled to death.
Because it was from his neck.
And you could actually see the ligature marks.
I knew that for someone to have flushed a dead body down the loo in small pieces, it was going to be somebody a little bit different. When NILSEN came in through that front door, I'd already made a decision to be very light-hearted with him. And I remember saying to him, "Mr. NILSEN," and he said, "Yes, that's me." And I said, "I'm Detective Chief Inspector J. I've come about your drains." And a little smile came across his face, and he said, "Well, since when have police been interested in blocked drains?" And I said to him, "Well, you take me up in your flat and I'll tell you all about it." The first thing that caught me was the smell of decomposing flesh. I said to him, "I'm here because your drains were blocked with human remains." And he said, "Oh my God, how awful." And I just got a little bit closer to him, face to face, looked him straight in the eyes and said, "Don't mess me about. Where's the rest of the body?" And he just paused momentarily and he said, "In plastic bags in the other room."
So when the officers ask him if there's any more victims,
Dennis is like, "Yeah, in that drawer, in that tea cabinet, and that thing over there." And they're just like, what?
Dennis admits, all right, the body's in bags in this room. And he actually says, "Do you want to go look at the rest of them?" And the officers were like, no. Nope. We know they're here. we can tell. So they just arrest him. And so they ask how many more bodies they're going to find. And, they're expecting at least 2 or 3 other bodies. And Dennis is just like 15 or 16 since 1978.
And Dennis has actually told the arresting officer that if they hadn't come when they did, it could have been 150.
That whole turning over a new leaf thing
was not working for Dennis.
That was done. No more of that. But at the police station, he actually made a full confession.
He was very cooperative with the police. Very
cooperative.
Which also still adds to my belief that he maybe wanted to be caught, that he didn't enjoy what was going on, and that he thought maybe he needed help.
Yeah, I mean, he showed the police where the bodies had been incinerated before.
Yep.
He comes completely clean. He doesn't hide anything from them. He's very articulate. He's very calm. He's very forthcoming. Not that there's ever an ideal situation for a murder investigation, but this essentially is. He wasn't interested in leaving out details, as in with most serial killers. He was very
forthcoming.
Yeah, willing to talk, but that's a stereotype, or not even a type. That is literally something that serial killers do. They enjoy talking about the crimes and about themselves.
You remember, Dennis is very self-obsessed, and he likes talking about himself anyway, and he had a very willing audience.
For his trial, NILSEN was assessed by 2 psychiatrists.
Yes.
And Chelsea and I have before this, we were going back and forth, and we were digging for information. But the psychiatrists were there to determine whether or not he was sane. They found that he had a difficulty with his emotions, which
We know.
And the only one that he could express well was anger. One of the psychiatrists diagnosed him with borderline pseudo-normal narcissistic personality disorder, which I have never heard it said that way, ever.
No, I haven't either.
Is that like a British thing?
It could be. Or it could just be a sign of the times, because psychology changes frequently, the terms change frequently.
I've heard borderline personality disorder with narcissistic tendencies, but not described as the pseudo-normal narcissistic personality disorder. But regardless, and occasionally he suffered from schizoid outbreaks, which I don't even think that's the accepted vernacular.
It's I don't really think it is anymore. I don't know. I'm having a hard time with him being diagnosed with NPD, because while he did have narcissistic tendencies, he wasn't a full-blown narcissist either.
Chelsea and I have gone back and forth. Obviously, neither of us are psychologists.
No.
Neither of us are physicians. Chelsea has experience. I have no experience. It's just an interest of mine. But he doesn't fit.
It's important to note that my experience is outdated. I haven't studied in years.
Yeah.
But, we try to look into it. We try to figure it out. And just nothing fits with him. He was a normal dude.
And I think that's the situation that we're coming to, is while I don't want to diminish anybody's personal trauma, he did not have significant trauma.
No.
As a young child, the trauma that he experienced in wartime, he very well could have had PTSD, but he doesn't really exhibit other than anger.
But he also had that anger before all of that happened too. So I don't know. This one's a tough one for me. I just think he had anger issues, and I think he had control issues, and I think he may have been depressed and had major, loneliness
This
issues.
is going to be one of the only serial killers, I have a feeling, that we actually say was not mentally ill.
No, I don't think he was mentally ill. I think he was very sane. He was likely a narcissist. Maybe some borderline personality disorder. I don't know. He's a tough one. I think he was totally sane. I don't think he had a mental illness. I think he was just a fucked up individual.
So at his trial, he stated that he had never had premeditated plan to kill his victims. Rather, it was something that just suddenly occurred. No.
Well, I don't really think it was premeditated. I really don't think it was. I think it was he brought them home with the intent of sleeping with them and possibly forming a relationship with them, and then panic would set in and he would kill them.
I feel like he always knew that it was a risk that it was going to happen with the ones that he liked. And to that degree...
I agree with that.
I mean, is that quite premeditation? I don't know, but I feel like he knew that if he really liked them, that he was going to want them to stay, and his way of making them stay
was killing them.
So in that respect, that's where I'm like, I don't know if I buy the not premeditated, but I'd have to research the legality of what is considered premeditated.
Should we look it up right now?
Yeah.
Let's just
Do 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 do. Chelsea's looking it up so we can get the actual.
So I Googled it. This is straight from vocabulary.com.
Oh, she asked the Google.
A premeditated crime involves careful planning and research before it happens. This means that the murderer didn't just lose his temper and kill someone in the moment. Instead, he went after a specific person on purpose.
So then I guess it really wouldn't be premeditated.
It really wasn't premeditated. It says premeditation definition is characterized by fully conscious, willful intent and a measure of forethought and planning. So no, I really don't think this was premeditated, because he was just going to gay bars and would pick up these men.
That boy was lying to himself. He knew if he liked him,
he was going to kill him. Well, I mean, he was found guilty. He was charged with 6 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder, and he did plead not guilty to all of the charges, but the jury returned the next day with a majority verdict of guilty. He was initially condemned to a life sentence, which in the 1980s meant that he would have to serve at least 25 years before parole is considered. But in December of 1998, The Home Secretary Jack Straw increased NILSEN's term to a whole life tariff, which meant that he would never leave prison.
Yeah, so there's obviously England's laws versus America's laws are very different, and their life sentencing at that time was different than what ours was.
Yeah.
I don't remember all the details, but I remember there was some hubbub about the potential that he might actually get out, but that was
Yeah.
none of it.
So at 72 years old, he was complaining of severe stomach aches, and he was rushed off to the hospital where he underwent surgery, but he died from complications with blood clots on May 12th of 2018
Yeah, he died in prison.
at 72.
So there are some interesting in-between things that happen while he's in prison. He actually goes on to write a unpublished 400-page autobiography, which we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, called The History of a Drowning Boy. And he's quoted as to saying, "When I was with people, I was in the real world. And in my private life, I snapped instantly into my fantasy life. I could oscillate between the two with instant ease."
That's so weird. This dude, he's a weird one. That's all I can say about it. He's a weird one. He's one fucked up individual. I mean, he's a necrophiliac, which, in and of itself is a psychological diagnosis.
The Scotland Yard, I believe, they have this thing called the Black Museum, and they have murderabilia there, which is a super trendy way of saying they keep murder items in this museum for the public to view. And several of his items, like the stove that he used to cook the heads in, is on display.
Why?
People, we're all fucked up out here, man. We like some weird shit. Like,
I think it's just human nature to want to understand.
yeah, absolutely. It 100% is, and I think that's kind of why we do this podcast, is to have an open discussion as to the why and to understand. I mean, obviously, it's interesting.
Yeah.
And I mean, I like people to think critically about. You can very easily throw a title on a serial killer and expect them to be the stereotype. Like, I almost think that Richard Trenton Chase was kind of like the stereotype, that people envision this super crazy person that has no rationale whatsoever.
But realistically, serial killers aren't like that
At
most
all.
of the time.
I think a lot of people envision this unattractive, scary boogeyman.
Monster. And then you have people like Ted Bundy, who were very charismatic and handsome and attractive to women and used that to their advantage.
This guy in particular was described by everyone as just an average British dude, as just an average everyday guy.
I mean, the police even said they were so shocked when he walked up to his apartment because they didn't really know what to expect. They thought they were going to encounter this monster, and up walks this guy in his tweed suit and glasses and was just very normal and unassuming, and they just didn't really know what to make of that.
He wasn't incredibly shy, but he also wasn't, ridiculously outgoing. He wasn't the life of the party, but he also had polite conversation with people at the bar. He went to the pub, pretty routinely. There was nothing obtrusive about this person other than he was a lush. He drank a lot.
He did drink a lot.
And sometimes he could be really mean when he was like criticizing, not violent.
And I remember in one of the interviews where one of his, I guess you could call it his best friend, was interviewed. Mm-hmm. His best friend did say when he was drinking, he was worse.
Yeah. And that's what, like he would never move. His best friend would never move in with him.
Because he was too hard to live with.
Yeah, he was too hard to live with. And his best friend, you could hear in his interview how much he loved him.
Yeah, there's real pain.
It's so bizarre because it was the same thing with Gacy. It was to hear other people talk so affectionately about what these monstrous killers were. It was so bizarre. A reporter didn't realize that in British prisons, you are not allowed to write inmates who are on trial or convicted or whatever. I'm not sure what the legal term was back then, but you're not allowed to write them and ask to partake in a book with them.
Right.
He didn't realize this, and he did it anyways. Well, he didn't realize this, and he did it. So he and Dennis struck up a pen pal relationship. They wrote each other constantly, and he wanted to get a outsider's perspective of the inner workings of Dennis. And they, over the period of years, wrote this book essentially together. You would just have to watch the documentary yourself to understand.
Yeah, if you're interested in learning more about Dennis, literally just type his name into YouTube and you'll get tons of hits. I mean, documentaries, interviews with people who knew him. This is going to sound terrible, but I was pretty stoked at how many interviews there were about this guy and how many home video clips there were of him, because it really gave you a really good grasp of what was going on.
I will say about the documentary that is presented more with that reporter turned author.
Right.
And Dennis, you hear a lot of Dennis's voice. You hear a lot of what is in the book, and it doesn't dumb it down for you. So these are two very articulate, intelligent men who speak very quickly and smartly,
and they have British accents,
and they have British accents on top of it. So maybe it might be hard to follow. It's definitely something that you have to sit down and pay attention to. It's not background.
No.
So yeah, the jury's kind of out with me and Chelsea. We don't really think that motherfucker was mentally ill.
I just think he was a fucked up individual.
I just think he was a fucked up dude. So
with that being said, Christina, how many Jeffreys are you giving to Dennis here?
You know, I'm gonna give him 6 out of 10.
6 out of 10? I think I'm right with you. Maybe like a 7 out of 10.
If he enjoyed what he did more,
yeah,
I think I would break him up higher. But because like there was, I don't know. I'm so confused
because like what he did with the bodies was so horrifying.
So his author friend says to him, wouldn't that have created this gigantic mess and blood everywhere? And Dennis was like, no, not at all. What you're envisioning is not reality. If I was to cut your head off right now, what a thing to hear from a serial killer, by the way.
Right.
Your blood is currently pumping. You would pour out blood and there would be blood everywhere. But a deceased body, and a body by strangulation, is a clean death. And then a deceased body does not have a heart that is pumping out blood. It coagulates and you get lividity. So
it may ooze a little bit, but that's about it.
So you're not actually, it's not a very
messy
thing.
God.
I know, it's just wrong. Okay, but I needed to
get that out.
I needed to describe this because it allows you to understand how his brain functions in a different way, where like, because he was a butcher, he was able to
kind of disconnect.
Yeah, that is information that somewhere in the back of my brain, yes, I know there's lividity. I know that the blood is not flowing. I know that it would not be ridiculous, this mess. But I'm not like sitting there and like, oh yeah, of course. Like, no, it's really clean. It's fine.
Why'd you have to pick this dude? We had 2 necrophiliacs like back to back, man. And I am not cool with this.
Murder. Palate cleanser. This is the palate cleanser.
You know what? I really hope that no one ever needs to check my Google history because...
Oh, yeah. We're fucked.
This is pretty bad.
10 out of 10. Maximum fuckery.
What's the difference between a bus and a dead girl?
What?
I don't ride the bus.
Oh, my God.
That's a Ted Bundy meme.
Oh.
What's the difference between your mom and treasure?
What?
I don't dig up treasure.
Oh, God. Ed Gein.
If Susan has 2 pies that cost $2.95 each, and Sarah has 5 that cost $7. How many pies would I have after I strangle them?
If you want to support our podcast, be sure to leave us a rating and a review anywhere that you listen to the damn thing. That's what helps get us exposure. That's what helps get us attention and keeps fueling this hobby that we do enjoy so much.
Go like us on Facebook. Leave us a review there. Go like us on Instagram. You can find us at The Killer Tea. Leaving us a review on Facebook also helps get us exposure.
Pretty, please.
Please.
Join us on the next episode where we talk about our hometown killer, Anthony Sowell.
The Cleveland Strangler.
Cleveland rock. This is a really weird time to have home spirit.
Unique New York.
Unique New York.
New York. Unique. Shall shit. She said some seashells by the seashore.
Testing. Doing the same bullshit that we do every single week when we test our microphones. It's not fun. Just talking, singing.
Welcome to episode 4 of The Killer Tea. No.